Today we're going to be covering one of the most difficult positions for newbies to maintain, the mount. And as a brown belt with 9 years of training, we'll cover some of the things that I prefer to do in this position that helps me be successful. Let's jump in. Now, it's important to note that throughout this video, you will be seeing submissions when I'm talking about mount retainments. The idea of the video, the point of the video is not to show you and walk you through how to do submissions, but how to hold the position. So I want you to keep that in mind. I will show you a submission and walk you through it at the very end. So stick around for that. When it comes to retaining the mount, one of the biggest things I see white belts trying to do is holding on to this position for dear life. Meaning, if they start to lose the position, they clamp on even harder, which doesn't help you retain the mount. It just helps your opponent roll you into something else. One of the best things you can do if you're losing the mount is to transition to something else. Stop holding on for dear life and evolve your positioning. One of my favorites to transition to is called the S mount. As you can see here, it doesn't matter which direction my opponent picks. Once he bridges and rolls to one direction, I transition my S mount so that my face is looking in the same direction as his face. You'll notice that my foot that ends up close to his belly ends up flat on the ground. My other leg ends up knee down on the mat, tucked into him. One thing I want you to remember to help your S mount be successful is that you're pinching your legs together. So essentially, you're moving your heel closer to his stomach and you're pinching your knee into his back, applying pressure from both sides of his body. Now from here, this isn't necessarily a place you're going to hang out in. This is a transitional piece. One of my favorite things to do from here is to look for a back take. So I will look for a twisting arm control. When I say north side hand and south side hand, I'm referring to north side being closer to his face or his head and south side being closer to his feet. So I will take my north side hand, reach under his neck and cross grab his opposite wrist. I've got a lot of control here. From here, I will collapse my chest down on top of his shoulder and go ahead and get the gift wrap, which is very simple and effective. All I'm doing is taking my south side hand or my opposite free hand and reaching across his body under his armpit and grabbing my other wrist. From here, all I have to do is tuck my back leg, my back ankle up against his body. I lift his body up. I pull him up to my chest and I sit down to my butt, rotate back to my opposite hip. From here, I have a nice position on the back. And as you can see here, you don't necessarily have to go for the choke. What you can do is maintain your grip and look for an armbar. Again, I'm not really looking to teach this to you right now. We can do a future video on this one, but I really just want you to see your options once you take the back. And keep in mind, this all came from not overly committing to maintaining the mount. If I would have overly committed, I just would have ended up on my back and he would have ended up on top of me in my guard. But because I was able to be dynamic and flow with what my opponent was giving me, not only did I give myself an advantage as far as positioning goes, I opened up the door of opportunity for more routes of offense, more routes of attack. Something that you'll notice as you progress through jiu-jitsu, it's not always about pinning and forcing a submission on your opponent, but flowing and taking what they give you, which really just comes from transitioning away from battles that you're losing. Next up, retaining the mount. We're not transitioning away from it. We're really going to retain it with this example. So as you see, I'm gonna go chest to chest. I do like to get a scarf hold position. My right arm goes under his neck, and either I'm going for wrist control on that left wrist, or I can go for an underhook. Simultaneously, I'm also utilizing my legs to scoop under his so that my heels aim towards the sky. If you notice the positioning of my knees, my weight is buried into the mat on top of my kneecaps. This allows me to apply downward pressure through my hips, making it more difficult for him to bridge up. Now, one thing I notice that white belts do is they all try to grapevine, right? And I didn't show this example because I don't want it to even put it in your head. If you don't know the grapevine, great, you don't have to use it. I would prefer that you don't. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's other people out there who would say that it's a great thing to do. My way isn't the only way, guys. This is just what I like. So what I'm looking for is to cross my feet in between his legs with my heels pointing up towards the sky. This makes it very difficult for him to weave his legs in and out to solve that problem. It's much more effective at retaining the position than grapevining would. Now, once I have all this set in place, this can be an exhausting position for your opponent. His body is carrying your body weight. He will be burning more energy trying to get out of this than you will be maintaining it. Now, once you have this positioning locked in, this is where you're gonna look for your submissions. One of the first submissions we learn is the Americana. Again, not showing you this so I can go over the Americana piece by piece, but just showing you that this is the only time you should really go for the Americana is once you have the position cemented. I see a lot of guys go for the Americana prematurely and it doesn't work. Well, you don't have the body stabilized. I want that body pinned and stabilized before I move to submissions. I know you guys have heard me say this before, but position over submission. This is a good example of that. Have the position set before you move to the submission. Next up, high mount versus low mount. So a couple different angles of attack here. I prefer high mount just because, as you can see in this example, when he bridges his hips and I'm sitting on his upper chest, I don't have to worry a lot about his leverage or his power because all of his leverage and power is in his hips where I'm not sitting. If I'm sitting lower on his hips and he bridges up, I'm going for a much more aggressive ride. In order to obtain the high mount, normally what I look for is a little space between their elbows and the floor. If I can get my legs, or specifically my knees, underneath your triceps and up close to your armpits, I will be able to get to the high mount pretty easily. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm taking one or maybe even both of my hands, placing them on top of my opponent's head, using that as an anchor point. So I'm using my lats and my arms to pull my body up his by pulling on his head. Once I'm in this high mount position, I can then start looking for submissions. So the high mount is great for shooting submissions like the mounted triangle, or even from the mounted triangle hitting an armbar, as you can see in this example. Now, vice versa, the low mount still has its applications. It's great for stabilizing your opponent, as we talked about in the last example, but you will just have to be aware of that extra bridging power that he has, since you'll be seated over his hips, which is where, we want to kick our legs back, drop that hip pressure down like we talked about. I truly like high mount and low mount. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. They both have their pros and cons, and as you develop your style, you will be able to tell which one you like a little bit more. The one thing I would encourage you to do is don't let the mistakes of either position scare you away from trying them. You have to suck in all of these situations before you can be good in these situations. A lot of people get caught up in the fact that they keep making mistakes in a certain position and they just bail on it. And I'm guilty of that. I bailed on mounts for most of white belt and part of blue belt. And that was a big mistake. I kept seeing mistakes and failures there, so I just gave up on it. I said, it's not for me. I'll hang out in side control. Well, it's a great position. You just need to suck at it for a little bit. So don't let that discourage you. Keep working it because it will get better. Last but not least, what if you have to bail on the mount? This is a great option, right? If you're going against someone who's just really good with mount escapes and you don't feel that you have the control necessary to keep this person where you want them, there's nothing wrong with bailing on the position if you can't hold it. Now, for training purposes, I would say it's okay to make the mistakes, try to transition to something else, try to get your high mount or your low mount. If you end up losing the position, like we already talked about, that's good for your reps, it's good for your learning. But in a tournament scenario, maybe even a self-defense scenario out on the street, if you feel that you're losing the position, you don't feel confident with transitioning to something else in the middle of the fight, you can always bail to either side control or knee on belly. Now, normally I like to look for some kind of head control before I bail into side control or knee on belly, normally with a scarf hold. So I'll get an underhook on the head, and then the opposite leg from the arm that's scarf holding the head is going to backstep over the body. From here, I can drop really nicely into side control. Now, the second option, which is more of my preference, is dropping back in the knee on belly. I do the same exact movement with the back step, except I'm now placing my knee on his diaphragm area. What I'm doing here is setting up the submission I referred to in the beginning of the video. Most of the time, knee on belly is done exactly how it sounds, with your knee across his belly, sometimes even across his hips. It's a nice, easy place to rest, but I want to put my opponent in a difficult position and one that I could possibly get a submission from. So as you can see here, I'm backstepping with my one leg, and as I'm doing that, I'm also moving my other leg out and away. I'm creating a stable platform for my body to set up this knee on belly. Now, with my hands connected under his head, I can gable grip my hands together. And what I'm gonna do is place all my weight through my knee into his diaphragm as I pick his body up and pull towards my knee. I'm not just picking straight up, I'm pulling at an angle, almost a 45-degree angle in the direction of my own knee. This puts an intense amount of pressure on the diaphragm, which makes it very hard for this person to breathe. And in fact, if you do this correctly, you're gonna squeeze all the air out of his lungs. From here, once you pick his upper body up and you're dropping all that weight through your knee and his diaphragm, it makes it very hard for him to escape, to hip, to move, to anything. And if you piece all of this together correctly, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to escape. I've personally found that guys with really good cardio take a little bit longer to submit with this, but if you hold it for long enough and you hold it correctly, it should work. If your foot is too close to his ribs, your knee is not going to be dead center in the diaphragm, and you're not going to have that crushing power that you want when you go ahead and pick his upper body up. I normally call this one a diaphragm crush, but that's just because I haven't seen it called anything else. So if you guys know this by another name, drop it in the comments below. And if we don't have any names for it, why don't we name it something cool? Let's figure something out. At the end of the day, I know the mount is a complex position to maintain, but if we break it down, make it simple, and also just realize that the mistakes we make are okay, it's a really fun position and you can become really good at it. You just have to learn to lose it, right? Lose it a bunch of times, that's fine. Work through this stuff and understand that the first time you try it, you're probably not gonna be good at it. That's jujitsu. That's all of jujitsu. Don't let it discourage you like it discouraged me, right? I missed out on probably 2 years of training the mount or mount retainment because I was making mistakes with it and I just got frustrated and gave up on it. That's not the right attitude to have. Commit to it, make the mistakes, learn from it, and I guarantee you'll be ahead of the curve. And if you guys stuck with me for the whole video, I appreciate you. I know my voice sounds like crap. I've been sick, but the show must go on. So you know how we like to end them, sometimes backwards, always forwards. I'll see you in the next one.